It's not the critic who counts. It's not the man who points out where the strong man stumbled and fell, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. It is the man in the arena whose face is covered with dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly but falls short, but gets up and tries again and again. And in the end, if he succeeds, he knows the triumph of high achievement. And if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, and is never numbered among those timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. What is this thing? Solex? Clips? I don't know.
Well, anyways, I'm probably going to, this might be the only time you hear my voice on this channel, hopefully, unless I'm sitting where Richard's sitting. But this is the Neil Estes podcast. He hates that. We're probably going to change the name, but Neil is an aviator, carpenter, a mechanic, a father, a bunch of stuff. He's 80 years old and rides a motorcycle to work, and when he doesn't ride the motorcycle, he rides a V8 swapped MGB. So, two of the most interesting men I know.
Little feedback.
Probably a little feedback.
So, I was trying to remember the kid that, I got a lot of feedback. I was trying to remember the kid that bought the barrel, and we're up in your office one night. He's one of those guys that used to wear the gold Quaalude pill around his neck and a razor blade, gold razor blade.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember this night. We're up in your office. We'd been down in the barrel, which was then called One-Eyed Jack's. And he wants to wrestle. Try and think back to that. And I remember there was a transition in your demeanor, which many years later, Gordon reminded me of that when the Pizza Gollies wanted to wrestle. I don't know, you just changed in a way that, this kid's like 30, and we're all in our 50s, I guess, whatever it was back in those days. And he was aggressive until you changed your, your vibes. Do you remember anything about that?
No, I do not. You say I changed them. Did I become more aggressive or passive or impatient?
Well, you took a different stance. You went from, to, oh, okay. And it was right there in the office at the front when the bay window was still there.
Yeah.
You talking about the barrel?
He's the kid that...
And it was in the barrel?
Yeah, it was in the barrel. He's the kid that bought the barrel and changed the name to One-Eyed Jack's.
And I remember him.
I say he had this, 714 little gold Quaalude and a gold razor blade for cutting up, cocaine.
I don't remember him, but do you remember Standing Arthur?
Of course.
Standing Arthur was a guy that stood out on the stoop. These are old Baltimore kind of row houses. Each one has a marble stoop because
One block street,
4-story brick row houses.
Baltimore Place.
Baltimore. And Standing Arthur used to come, and my office was in one of those units, up 6 or 7 risers. And Standing Arthur came by, and he came and stood out on the stoop. And he would stand there, and he would look at the skyline of Atlanta, because you could see it all the way across. And Portman's first building went up there, and it was just starting to grow. And he would stand there all day long. And then the next day, he'd come and he'd stand there the next day, and the next day, and the next week. And his beard grew down, and his clothes started to mold off of him, and you could go up and say, "What you looking at, Arthur?" He'd just look at us. The city. Anything going on? No. And it became such an issue that we had to call the police. And the police said, They can do nothing about it. He's not doing any infringement unless you want to say it's a trespassing. And we said, no. But we had to do something to get him to a hospital. And so we perpetrated a crime, a burglary, called the police, went around and showed him where there was a broken window. We said Arthur did it. And that was the only way that Arthur could get medical help. And he went to the hospital for it.
Well, I asked Arthur specifically what he was doing, because he would stand in the same spot, and the tops of he was barefooted, the tops of his feet would be raw from sunburn.
Yes.
I mean, raw. And he would start out in the morning like this. And about noon, he'd be like this. And end of the day, he'd be like this.
Watching the sun go by.
He says, I'm watching the sun. I'm watching the sun go by.
I'd forgotten that.
So, you know. Of course, there was Jack, the wino. Lived in a car back behind the block.
Yes.
I don't know whose car that was. But Jack would greet everybody the same way. Hello, knucklehead. And he'd solicit, I need $5. Are you going to get something to eat? No, hell no, I'm not going to get something to eat. I'm going to get some wine. That was Jack.
The clientele at One-Eyed Jack's was so varied. There was a newspaper guy. He used to come in and sit at the third booth back, and a talented, intellectual achiever, but that was not what I would describe your ordinary clientele there. However, he fit so perfectly.
Well, he worked for Reuters.
Yes, yes.
And I can see him. I don't quite have his name yet.
But wasn't it wonderful the way a person of his intellectual achievement fit with the rest of us?
He was more a barrel guy than One-Eyed Jack's.
Correct.
Hey, Neil,
Correct.
why don't you say what the barrel was or how that came to be?
The bottom of the barrel was a folk, jazz, and blues club and bar, beer and wine only. Late 60s through the early 70s. That was one of very, very few music venues in the town at that time, and one of only two for the longest time where you had folk, jazz, and blues. And then a third place opened up, the 12th Gate, which was on 10th Street. The other one was the Bistro, Tom Hayward's place, and we were rivals. But the barrel was a terrace, two terrace.
You weren't rivals. You were parallel operations. People.
His was the more glitzy operation by far, and the more ambitious. The Bistro was in a house on West Peach Street. No, Spring Street. And it was a pretty cool place. Tommy, actually, my brother Tommy did a guest set there. This is when Tommy was the best of his life. And I tell you, the place was packed, and he had them. He did 3 songs, and they wanted more.
That's how you guys met, though.
That was a great night.
You and Richard.
Oh, no. We met at the Barrel. Richard's office was up above.
Yeah.
One floor above. So, and I was a young architect putting in hours after hours of work. My floor would vibrate until I could take it no longer. Usually about 9 o'clock, and then I'd cave in, close the door, run downstairs. I need a beer. In fact, it was Budweiser in those days. That was a long time
It was
ago.
Blue Ribbon.
Was it? That was early.
We had Blue Ribbon.
That's right.
We had Blue Ribbon on tap.
Then I moved up to Budweiser. Finally got up to Heineken's.
No, Carling came in and said, you know, how many barrels a week are you doing? And at the time we were doing like 15 barrels a week, something like that. And they said, we'll give you $1,500 if you change to our beer. And I said, man, people love Blue Ribbon on tap. He said, nobody will know the difference. I said, you're crazy. He said, no, they won't know the difference. So over the weekend, Sunday, they came in, changed all the taps, changed all the barrels, $1,500. Monday, I opened. The guy was right. I had not one single comment. And of course, we didn't do any tap labels, because that's what I said. I said, we can't put your labels up. He said, we don't care about that. He said, you're going to buy the beer from us. So that transition took place over a weekend, and there was never one word of criticism or, hey, Neil, you changed the beer.
I don't think I ever knew it.
Yeah, went from PBR to Carling Black Label when their brewery was just off 75.
Yes, I remember that, yeah.
Just before you got to the airport. The building is still there. So, I don't know. The way I remember it is you came down in the afternoon. That's what I remember. Came in and said, you got any cold beer? And that's how we met.
And you hadn't started your bars yet, had you?
No. This might have been 2 years before Underground started. Wouldn't you guess something like that?
67.
Yeah, and when Underground started, Steve Fuller and Jack Patterson were the two guys that started Underground Atlanta, and they were friends. They used to come down to the bottom of the barrel, and I had a little airplane, and I took them on a trip to Mississippi. Then we went down to Florida when they were soliciting investors for Underground Atlanta to go down and start this underground city that was part of old Atlanta down by the railroad tracks. And Atlanta came in and put a street system 1 story up where they could get through traffic above the old railroad tracks. And that area down there under the viaducts went right out to the building edges. You couldn't look up and see the world above. So it was like a giant basement down there with railroad
Except
tracks.
all of the original storefronts were 1 story down from street level, a new street level.
Right.
And the people that didn't experience Underground in those days will never know.
Right, because it was like going back 150 years in history to be down there with these old storefronts, and then they brought in some not very good street lighting, but there was street lighting, and it was kind of mystical and not scary, but edgy. And that was the beginning of Underground. And Jack Patterson and Steve Fuller, they did get investors, and in return, they offered me a favorable lease for a parking deck. And so we ran a parking deck for a year, which was quite an experience, because down on the bottom level of the parking deck, we had a gambling casino on Friday nights, and we'd have a crowd of workers, mostly workers. They were not, they were a rough crowd. And we'd run that casino at night, and I remember that's where I learned about cheating in shooting craps. And it was okay to cheat if you had the authority to back it up. You carried your authority in your belt. Because I remember a guy, I rolled a 7, he said it was 8 or something, and I said, no, man. And then he went for his authority, and that solved the problem, like that. Anyway, so we started with the parking deck and then opened the apothecary, which was like an old apothecary, a drugstore. We went to Monroe, Georgia, and bought out a drugstore that was going out of business, and it had the big vats and large bottles of pills and colored things and a glass counter. So we set it up as a storefront, and then you go through curtains into the back, and it's a jazz club. And mostly black performers. So it was kind of early on in that racial kind of business. Very, very successful.
Cortez Greer.
Cortez was there. Gosh, I can't remember.
And Judy Argo.
Judy was very pretty, but I was trying to think of the first black woman I ever kissed. I think her name was Keisha Brown.
Oh, Keisha Brown, yeah.
Yes, wasn't
Yeah,
she
Keisha,
pretty?
Oh, yeah, Keisha.
Yes, sir. And so it was quite successful. And then we sold it to some other investors in Underground and went and started Uncle Sam's. And Uncle Sam's was, I don't know what it was, 7,000 or 8,000 square feet of an old warehouse. And it was one of the first of the warehouse nightclubs. And it would hold 300 people, 400 people. Big, loud, wild,
And I built the bars in Uncle Sam's.
And you ran the bar, didn't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, over there.
And at the apothecary also.
I think we had 5 bars in the big space. Four bars.
There was a railroad bar.
Yeah.
It had the
Oh, that's right. We had one of the bars had railroad cars that ran around under a glass top.
little model train, model railroad.
And then behind that we built the newsroom, and then next to it we built the Klan Ramshackle, which was a private club. So we had 3 operations in that one place there.
Ramshackles is
Where was it?
This is right close to Piedmont Hospital off of
Bennett Street,
on Bennett Street, right off of Peachtree.
right behind Harrison's.
Yes.
High dollar real estate now.
You know, across the street from the Japanese Benihana. Right across the street.
Yeah.
Right next to the railroad tracks.
Yeah,
And then you opened up your automotive shop there.
down the street.
Yeah.
But I remember when I crashed the 356, I stored it in the back of the club, Ramshackle. And somebody went in there and stole the engine.
What?
I don't know if you remember, it was an 1800 roller crank.
That's right.
Trick motor.
Yeah.
It didn't take much to steal it because the impact of my crash ripped it loose from the transmission. Actually, I kind of bent the car at about 15 or 20 degrees. Went back there one day and the engine was gone.
Well, then I sold out the Uncle Sam's and started another nightclub, Rhett's, downtown. And it was during that period that I got involved with in the sales process with another element in our socio-economic level that I wasn't familiar with. I guess you call them gangsters. And I was having to carry a gun. And I was teaching at Georgia Tech at the time, teaching architecture. When I'd take my jacket, my tweed jacket, because that's what professors wore, I'd take it off, fold it, and I'd have to set it down on a desk gently so that it wouldn't thump. And I'd call Pete Moore. I'd get a phone call threatening my life, and I'd call Pete Moore, who was a partner in in these things.
P.W. Moore, Peter Watson Moore.
And I'd say, Pete, I need some cover. He would come over to Georgia Tech with a one of these raincoats that gangsters wear because he carried a shotgun, and he would be in the parking lot so I could park to go up to my class, to take my jacket off, to put it, and didn't want to thump. And it was just at one of those afternoons, I said, this is the end of it all. It's got to stop. And I went to my partners in Uncle Sam's and these other clubs and told them I wanted to sell it. I wanted them to buy me out. And none of them would. They wouldn't put up a penny. They said, no, you want to leave, go leave.
Do you remember giving me, because when you and Nancy got married, when you went to Cancun, that was August of 75.
August the 1st, yes.
And I watched the house.
Yes,
So I stayed over on Andrews Drive for whatever that was, 3 or 4 days or a week, whatever it was. And you gave me your pistol. Anybody shows up.
Yeah. Well, I gave all of my stock away. I just walked away from it. It wasn't worth it. It was a great adventure, but it was serious. Oh, the two guys that bought Uncle Sam's, they did not turn up at the closing because they turned up in the river, in the trunk of their Lincoln Continental in the Chattahoochee River, and missed the closing. And that
It'd be a good
ended
excuse.
it for me. And so I just got out altogether, total loss, economic.
My flight's here. Good to see you. I'll see you, Richard. Take care.
Take care.
I'll see you next week.
Okay, good.
So I got out, and I don't regret a minute of it. I would never repeat a minute of it.
You know, what the heck happened to Pete? And why was Billy McKinnon?
Yeah.
What was the huge fallout between Billy McKinnon and Pete? Maybe it had something to do with the restaurant business, or because McKinnon's, as you know, he had La Louisiane, and he had Billy McKinnon's on Maple Street.
Yes.
And I went in there one time. I used to go there a lot. Before that, it was Joe Dale's.
Yes.
And
Very
then
good.
Billy
Yeah.
took over that restaurant. And I just happened to casually, well, you know, what do you hear from Pete? Don't mention that name to me ever again, was his response. I don't know what.
I don't know either. When I got out of the business, I got all the way out. And Pete went on to develop some other restaurants, and I just don't know.
Pete died, you're pretty young.
Yes, very young. But live fast, die young, have a good-looking corpse. Remember that? That was Pete.
Pete Moore was, Pete was a lot like another person I could mention, but we used to have meetings about Pete. What are we going to do about Pete? Because when Pete had 2 drinks, he became, a complete personality change for the worse.
Yeah.
He would come in the barrel and just start tearing things up. One night he jammed his hand down a beer glass and, almost bled to death before we could get him to Crawford Long, which was right across the street.
Yeah. I don't know.
Pete Moore.
But that was an
Prominent
episode.
Atlanta family. Very
Sure.
prominent Atlanta family.
Hey, maybe you guys can talk about Flight. The sensation of Flight.
Flight?
How did that capture you?
I don't even know where you start that kind of thing. But it was back during the bottom of the barrel days is when No, I started flying lessons right out of college, right out of Tech.
Well, you came to the block right out of Tech.
Yeah.
You had an MGB.
Well, and that was all right then. And I went over to Gun Field, which is 25 miles east of Atlanta, out in the boondocks, little strip, 1,500 feet long, 30 feet wide.
Uphill.
Uphill that way, downhill that way. So you learn to...
Uphill on 2-7.
Yes. To
2-7 was
west.
uphill, 9 was downhill.
And you learn to balance headwinds and grade. And if you can get them working for you, they'll either work for you or against you. And before I got I guess I soloed in 8 or 9 hours, which was normal back then. And maybe I had 20 hours. I bought the airplane, a Cessna 172 for $5,500. Straight tail, well used. Maybe there's a few hundred hours left on the motor. And boy, I was obsessed with flying. It consumed a lot of my life. And then you were down there running the bar. Didn't I didn't get you started. What did I participated in some manner or another.
You paid for my first solo.
First solo? Man, I must have had some money left.
I think it was $28.
Yeah. I didn't.
It was, I think.
Oh, that was
my recollection.
Oh,
is
just for that flight, yeah. Not okay.
$28.
And
I was trying to remember. Was it Charlie Jenkins, the one-armed guy that had the steerman?
Yes. And he used to crank his steerman with his one arm because that's where he lost his other arm. But he learned how to do it.
One way to learn.
Gun Airfield. I wish it was still there. I used to leave Gun, and when I was still a student, and go over to Stone Mountain and pick up passengers. You supposed to do this? Yeah, no problem. This is good. Stone Mountain's still there. It is now a radio controlled big deal where they have giant RC meets there. I haven't been, but everybody says it's fantastic. I'm surprised they haven't, demolished it. But I think it'd be pretty hard to find Gun. I don't know how the hell.
No, you can't. It's a subdivision came in and they used the runway as a street. It's now a subdivision.
I don't know how in the hell. You had 2A Yankee out there at one time, did you not? Yeah.
Yes, I did. Yeah, which was a Mooney.
So myself, Mary Stewart, Will, and Terry leave Gun and go to Charleston, where we're there for 2 or 3 days or whatever it was, and then come back, and it's dark, and somehow I find Gun.
Well, what you do is you get on the Unicom and you call George Gunn on the Unicom, and he comes out with his car and shines the headlights down the runway, and he'll blink them if you ask him to blink them. But I did that a number of times.
I was wiped out too.
That's how you made night landings there. Yeah.
I mean, I was absolutely wiped out.
Were you in the Mooney?
Yeah.
Yeah. 1,500 feet is short for the Mooney. So either you land uphill, that helps a lot.
We landed uphill.
If there's no wind, you land uphill. And it takes a lot of wind to land downhill. I think probably the runway length for a Mooney is 1,500 feet. So you have to keep it tight.
Anyway,
But I moved over to Peachtree Airport because Nancy, then my girlfriend, was taking flying lessons over at Epps Aviation. And I'd go over there, and Pat Epps would always be around, following her around like a puppy dog. So I'd go over looking after my interests. So I thought, hell spelled, I'll just move my plane over there.
yeah,
Then
Ep's a hound dog.
and then it won't look so bad of my snooping around, keeping an eye on my interests. And I guess we dated 8 or 9 years before we got married. But that's how I got over at Peachtree. And then had a great friendship with Pat Epps that lasted many, many years.
Didn't Nancy have an apartment on Peachtree?
Yeah,
Just down from the Fox.
just down from the Fox. And I remember I think I was in the Cessna, and I'd flown up to Washington, D.C., visit family. And I flew back at night, and I had no way to get from Gunn Field back to Atlanta. So I called on the telephone before I left, and I said, I'll fly down Peachtree about 9:30 or 10 o'clock, and I'll blink my landing lights as I pass your building, and then I'll fly over to Gunn Field, and you drive over there and pick me up. And so she sat by her window on the 9th floor, 10th floor or something, and then 9:45, coming down Peachtree Street at 200-300 feet, blink, 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 blink. And I had no idea if she got the message or not, and I just went over and landed, wait 15 minutes, and here comes Nancy to pick me up. That's how we did it in the good old days.
Yeah. My long cross country from Miami to Atlanta in a 172, I ran out of, I got low on fuel, so landed in Jacksonville. So by the time I got here, it was dark. Trying to find Peachtree. So finally, I went out to the Norcross VOR, 240 radial off the Norcross VOR. There's PDK. That was a good one. It was about 10:30. It's probably harder now to find Peachtree.
Yeah.
The lights. It was hard enough.
Yeah, you fly, you look for an airport around the
dark
city.
spot.
You look for the dark spot with a blinking green light. And a night landing in a strange airport, I had less than 100 hours. I had 90 some hours in the Cessna, and I had very, very little radio time or navigation time. But I needed to go to New York City, and you can't do it in one tank of gas. You have to stop, get gas. And by the time I got up to New York, it was well after dark. It was 9 or 10 at night, and it was overcast at 2,500 feet and raining. And I had filed a flight plan for LaGuardia. And I got up there, and I didn't know about I didn't know the difference between approach control, tower, and ground control. I'd never been through that sequence of things. And so I just called the tower without calling approach. I was right about at the Brooklyn Bridge, which is, I don't know, 8 or 10 miles south of LaGuardia, and announced my arrival. And they were VFR. They were on visual flight rules, but with the overcast, I was right at the bottom of the overcast. They assigned me an altitude 500 feet higher. And so obediently, I went up into the overcast. I didn't know how to fly on instruments. I'd never done it. I'd done it under the hood for practice, a couple of hours max. But I went up into the clouds, lost all reference to anything in New York. When you're flying up Manhattan, the rivers really define where you are. You can see the East River coming up because it's all black. And the cities are all sparkling white. Over here's Manhattan, and here's Brooklyn. And you come up between the two. And then you go up into the clouds, you lose everything until you start falling out of the clouds. And when you fall out of the clouds, all of the buildings are not like this. They're like this. And then you straighten up, you get all the buildings straight. And I would not go back in the cloud. And so I just cheated. I just went to 2,500 feet where I didn't tell them that I was cheating. I just cheated. And I called them, and they said, "Do you have the airport in sight?" And I said, "No." They said, "Well, we have the rabbit lights on." Thinking, what the hell are rabbit lights? I said, "Do you see the rabbit lights?" I didn't know what one was. I didn't want to express my ignorance, and I just said, "No, negative." And then they said, "Well, we'll blink the runway lights, see if you can see those." And they did. They blinked the runway lights. And damn thing, airport was right there. It was not 2 miles away. I'm at 2,000 feet, no problem. I cut the power, go to full flaps, and going in. The tower is calling commercial traffic, and I think diverting them. But I'm not sure because I was all focused on landing. I was going to land at that airport. I looked for other airplanes, but I was going to land there no matter what. And so I came on in and landed, and then I did have enough sense to switch over to ground control. Ground control directs me over to the General Aviation Airport, which is at the southwest corner of LaGuardia. I got there, and before I got out of the plane, ground calls and says,
Tower wants to talk to you.
Yeah, give us a call when you get at the service desk. And so I landed, got out of the plane, locked the door, went inside, walked past the service desk to the men's room, did my business there, came back out, went out the front door to where there were taxis waiting, and got a taxi and went to town and spent 2 days with Lucy, and who was my first wife, and we were going through divorce things, and I went up there to work out the final. I mean, you talk about a lot on your head. You land at LaGuardia, the tower wants to take your license away or put you in jail or something. You get a taxi and you go talk about divorces, spend 2 days. We're both on our very best behavior. It was a wonderful 2 days, had nice dinners and a theater one night, and then I come out the next morning. I think, well, I'll turn myself in. No, it was Monday morning. I'll turn myself into authorities when I get there. Well, I came up to the General Aviation Terminal, walked out to the airplane, unlocked the door. Plane was still there. I was surprised. I thought they might have impounded it. I unlocked the door, got inside, closed the door, latched it, put on my seat belt, cranked it up, and took off. Did not call ground control, had no clearances. I thought, whatever my problems are, I'm going to solve them in Atlanta. I was broke. Man, had hardly enough money to pay for the taxi from downtown to LaGuardia. Had to, give it in quarters and things like, I gave him a quarter tip, and I didn't have enough money for and this is before credit cards or anything, so you could write checks. And I did have some checks, but I was broke. The world was too much with us, Milton, as they used to say. I just got in the plane and flew back. Stopped in New Jersey for gas, and then flew the rest of the way and never heard a word from LaGuardia or FAA.
Until now.
Until next week. Yeah. And that story is in a book I just finished, 15 of the 16 dumbest things I've ever done in an airplane. And that was right up there for being, I don't know, it was just ignorance, mostly ignorance, and youth, irresponsibility, but ignorance, mostly. What's the dumbest thing you've ever done?
Well, I flew with a hangover once. That was enough. Remember those hangovers? Remember how bad hangovers could be?
That's
one of the perks of not drinking the way we used to drink.
Yes, I do.
Hangover would kill a normal person. I mean, God. I flew up to Athens and got lost.
Well, what about when you flew under the Chesapeake Bay Bridge?
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't real smart.
I have photographs of that.
Okay, well, that qualifies.
That was a good one.
Except
It was the 4th of July.
And I was flying.
We were dodging, there were so many sailboats in Chesapeake Bay that we were literally flying a slalom course through the masts.
We'd been up to
Shady side.
Maryland looking for Tam.
Shady side, yeah.
Shady Side, and we'd been up there on a mission, and we're on our way back. The bridge goes right in the way, and so either you go over it or under it, and you know how Neil is, so we went under it.
You know how Neil is.
He'd never been under a bridge.
So the tail numbers on 9-6 whiskey. Is it 9-6 whiskey?
1928 Yankee.
No, we were in the Bonanza.
Oh, 776 Romeo.
No. We were in your Bonanza.
Tango Whiskey. 196 Tango Whiskey.
9-6 Tango whiskey. I knew it was, but the tail numbers were about that big.
Yeah.
They were no more. I don't think they were no more than 2 inches. Whatever the minimum was, that's what the tail numbers were. I kept thinking about the Patuxent River Naval Station.
Yeah.
Sent up a couple of, F-14s and shoo us down.
Well, we were below radar for Patuxent River for a while. Anyway, that was one of the other 15 of the 16.
Yeah, I remember when we reduced our alcohol intake, and we talked about how, hell, we could do anything we want. Speed, drive reckless, do anything, because that was just a reckless driving ticket. That wasn't a DUI.
In my 4,000 hours of flying, I never violated the 12 hours from bottle to throttle.
I never did either. Like I said,
I made every other mistake in the world, but I never made that one. And I never ran out of gas. 2 things I did right.
I'm very sensitive to fuel. Ep's is not. Damn, Ep's will run on fumes.
Yeah.
More than once, I thought, man, we're going to run out of gas. Nah, we're good. I mean, what could be dumber? Running out of gas in an airplane.
Yeah. I've been in some situations where the circumstances can lead you there, even if you have good planning and
unexpected headwind, all sorts of things. Maneuvering you didn't know you had to do, altitude changes, yeah. But you're supposed to know where that airport is, Anyway, here we are. Is this a start?
This is a good start.
Well,
You guys are missing probably the biggest story you guys have together.
we're,
You're tired of telling it, I know.
yeah, well, I think we need to, I think we need to start drinking again in order to help the conversation along.
I don't disagree.
So, give me the prelude to Greenland. how you got involved.
How I got involved?
Yeah.
I was just,
Okay,
I was a likely,
a lot of people that are going to be watching this don't know what Greenland is. They don't know about the Expedition Society.
well, it's, other than just saying how I got involved, it's too big for today's session, that's for sure. I mean, I got involved because I was available, needed a pilot, needed, I'm assuming, Richard can tell this better, needed somebody that, knew which end of a wrench to,
Righty tighty, lefty loosey. You taught me that.
yeah,
That's all you need to know.
just had some practical abilities. But, of course, I was following it from the beginning of Richard's and Pat's involvement, and have pictures, photographs of the first time they went up there in the hangar, you and Rajani and Deegan. I've got pictures of that.
Okay, Richard, explain Greenland in 3 minutes.
Greenland and what?
3 minutes.
3 minutes? In 1980, well, actually it started in 1978. 1978, Pat Epps and Zip Martin and I were up at the Oshkosh Air Show. And we'd been out there and watched the show all day. It's the biggest air show in the world, I guess, and it's every year. It's spectacular. Aerobatics and antiques and military stuff and helicopters and autogyros and everything with aviation. And we'd been out there all day long, walking around, looking at airplanes, watching all this activity. And there's thousands of airplanes that go to these events. And you come in and you land, they park you in the grass, and there's just hundreds of acres of airplanes parked. And so we parked Zip's Bonanza, we parked it in the grass. We had a blue cooler with us, just an emergency cooler. We opened it up at the end of the day, and we're sitting under there relaxing and thinking, God, this was an incredible day. We have done everything. Man, everything aviation. I said, no, you never do everything aviation. And so we came up with what is the craziest thing you can do? And I think I came up with the idea, well, do you know that we here in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, we are 1/3 of the way from Atlanta to the North Pole. We've already done 1/3 of this thing.
I mean, it's downhill,
Yeah, now's the easy part. We got the hard part done. We got all of that, and so we got to talking about it. And believe it or not, it kind of took root. And we decided, well, we can't do it. 24 hours and bottle to throttle, so we have to wait for tomorrow. Okay, well, we'll wait for tomorrow. We go to town, got a nice hotel and nice tablecloth dinner and everything. We kept talking about this North Pole thing, and started looking at charts. And the geographic North Pole is beyond the range of a Bonanza, but the magnetic North Pole is about 500 miles away from the geographic North Pole, and the magnetic North Pole is always moving. And it has reversed all the way around to the South Pole 2,500 times in the 3 billion years life of the Earth. And so the core of the Earth is moving different from the shell. That's what it amounts to. Anyway, the magnetic North Pole back in 1980 was about 500 miles from the geographic North. Geographic North Pole is the one the Earth spins around. Magnetic pole spins with it. So we decided, well, we had to settle on the magnetic North Pole. But that's okay, because that's where all the compasses point. Every compass in the world points to the same point. We'll go roll that pole. So we got up the next morning, flew on up to Canada. We're headed up to Churchill, which is the largest city on the Hudson Bay, which is up there in the upper part of Canada. And the engine started knocking. We had to turn around, and we flew with that engine knocking from the Hudson Bay to Atlanta, Georgia. We got into Atlanta at 2 o'clock the next morning, and it turned out to be a muffler baffle was rattling. We thought it could have been serious. So the next year, I went to Pat to Zip, and I said, let's go back to the pole to finish the job. Well, neither Pat Epps nor Zip Martin was the least bit interested, so I took my Mooney and went up there, and I got up to the Hudson Bay and up to Churchill, and then up to the Arctic Circle, and then I was headed north of that. I was getting, maybe within 400 or 500 miles of the pole, and the weather was just intolerable. And this is 1979. There are no navigation aids. You have to fly by shooting the sun. And I got pretty good at that. And take sun shots and then do it the way Columbus sailed across the Atlantic with sun shots. But the weather got so bad I couldn't get any sun shots. And so then you're at the mercy of the magnetic North Pole, which is totally unreliable. I mean, the compasses sit there, and then it's a ball floating in alcohol, and it'll just start rotating.
The whiskey compass.
Yeah, they call it a whiskey. And it'll just start rotating, and then it'll stop, and it'll rotate, and you're flying straight. Anyway, I ended up flying back. Took 3 days to get back as a failure. I just didn't make it. And so the third year, which is 1980, and I got with Pat again. He says, I'll show you how to do it. And he went and put a spare tank in the back seat of his Bonanza, and we flew up to the magnetic North Pole. Let's see, this is the Earth. That's the magnetic North Pole. We fly up to it, and as we get closer and closer, we roll the plane inverted to see what the magnetic compass does, inverted, positive G's directly over the North Pole, and then you finish the roll. And that's called rolling the pole. And so one of us was the first guy ever to roll the pole. We got to the other side of the pole. The other guy takes the controls, and he is the first guy ever to unroll the pole. And then he hadn't had enough, so he goes back and he rolls the pole more times than anybody has ever rolled the pole, because he did it twice. And that was the end of that game. And so we're flying back from Greenland. We're flying back from the North Pole. We come back through Greenland. We're sitting in a bar in Sonderstrom Fjord and talking to some pilots.
BW-8.
And they're listening to this story about these good old boys from Georgia rolling the pole. And I don't know if they believed it. But nonetheless, they started telling stories about other planes that have crashed in Greenland, and there are a lot. And they talked about the Lost Squadron. And in 1942, 2 B-17 bombers and 6 P-38s, need another finger, they're flying to the war. And they're crossing Greenland. They get almost to Iceland. The weather turns bad. They go back, and they land on the ice cap in Greenland. Nobody's hurt, seriously. Everybody, they all survive. They're on the ice cap 2 weeks. They're 15 miles from the ocean. They can see the ocean out there. And a Coast Guard cutter, the Northland, comes in, sends up dogs, picks them up, takes them down, put them in a Coast Guard cutter, takes them back to the States. They go back to war and win the war, but they left the planes. So we hear about that. And so since Epps and I think we're big Arctic pilots, because we've been up there a couple times, we think, well, let's go. A guy named Russell Rajani goes out to Peachtree Airport, talks to Pat Epps, and tells Pat Epps that he, Rajani, has the rights of search and salvage of these airplanes. And Epps calls me. I go out and meet Rajani. We sit down. We end up working up a deal where Epps and I will fund the retrieval of these. As far as we know, they're sitting on the ice cap because everybody knows that Greenland is arid. It's too cold to snow. It takes, and there's a lot of proof. We've been to Greenland a couple of times. Another time, Epps and I took a plane and flew it to Europe and stopped in Greenland for gas. And the airports are always open in the summertime.
Yeah, it only snows about 20 feet.
Yeah.
So it's hardly any snow at all.
But that turns out to be unique to this area.
Yeah, we're in the temperate
Yes.
part of the glacier.
The east coast of Greenland, the Gulf Stream goes around the Gulf of Mexico, comes up, heads off of Cape Hatteras, goes catacorder across the Atlantic Ocean, runs up the bottom edge of Greenland and goes up and warms Iceland. And that's why they have trees and shrubbery and green things in Iceland, and it warms up England. You know, England is farther north than Maine, yet it's warm because of the Gulf. Anyway, you know all that. This part of Greenland is not like the rest. It's a temperate glacier, and they get lots of snow. We don't know this. We don't know shit from Shinola about Greenland. But we will learn. And,
We learned.
in fact, later on, Epps and I go up to the University of Indiana. It's Illinois, University of Illinois, Richard Byrd Institute, Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. And we give a lecture to the Richard Byrd Institute on how to penetrate glaciers deeper than any man has ever penetrated it before. Well, anyway, back to how we got to Greenland. We work out a deal with Rajani. We get in a Pat's brother, Doug, his Aztec, 4-seater airplane. We fly up to Greenland. We go out on the ice cap with metal detectors just in case the planes are not on the surface. And we go out and we can't find anything. We come back. That was the first expedition, total failure. We go back again with a ground-penetrating radar. Pat and I go to Georgia Tech. They tell us that metal detectors don't work up that close to the magnetic North Pole, which we learned. We didn't know that either. We learned, go back with ground-penetrating radar, and we can't get on the ice cap. Weather's too bad. It's a blizzard. Second expedition, total failure. We go back a third time with ground-penetrating radar. Dr. Bruce Bevins was our geophysicist to find the airplanes. We can't find them because he doesn't have the right frequency. And we didn't know, nor did anybody else know, the right frequencies to have. The way you find out as you go up there. So that was the third expedition. Fourth expedition, we go up with ground-penetrating radar, and we find the planes. They're 80 meters deep, 250 feet. We go down, we probe, and we touch an airplane, but we cannot melt a shaft down to it because the nature of the glacier at that point, the planes are 250 feet deep. The glacier's 2,500 feet deep. So we're only playing with the top little bit, but there's a thing in there called a firn line, and that's the area from here down, it's solid blue ice. This is like a head of a beer. The first 70 feet is porous. And so we could penetrate the porous, but when we got to the hard blue ice, we could not steer our melt head. So then that's when you came up, the end of the fourth expedition.
88.
88. Then we
When
went,
Tuma was with you.
yes. And then we went back in 89, and we got the melt head to go down. That's when it hit the firn line. In 1990, we hit the firn line and we couldn't steer it. Then 1990 was the Pizza Gully expedition. And that's when we got down to the B-17. We divided up into two camps, the Pizza Gully camp and the Greenland Expeditions camp. And the Greenland Expedition camp got down to the B-17, got all the bits and pieces and all of that stuff, but we didn't get a plane out. And then in 92, we went with Roy Schaffner, and we got the P-38 out in pieces. That was 92. It took him 10 years, 2002, to put the plane back together again, and it flew. And it flies now. That's the story of the Greenland Expedition Society.
A lot of story.
The Greenland Expedition Society lost their ass financially on it, had to sell their part to Roy Schaffner, the last guy, and so none of us ever got to fly the plane.
And now you don't have licenses.
I have a license.
Well, you don't have a medical.
I don't. My medical has expired.
So we got to hijack an airplane, illegally fly it
And
back to the Brooklyn
it's
Bridge.
just an airplane. All you got to know to fly is when the trees get bigger, you pull back. You get that. The rest
That's how the guys back then did it. However, they had 200 hours in a T6.
Who does?
200 hours total. I don't know how many in a T6, maybe 50 or 60.
Who?
Pilots.
World War II pilots
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
that read the POH, got in a P-38, and a P-51, and a C-47, and a Corsair, and
Oh boy. Yeah.
and you on and on, all of them.
I think there's even a story of Paul Tibbets had not flown a B-29. He had plenty of B-17 time and no B-29 time.
Yeah,
It's got 4 motors. I can run it. Paul Tibbets flew the Enola Gay. Does that mean anything?
Who? What's the Enola
Paul
Gay?
Tibbets flew the
What's the
Enola
Enola
Gay.
Gay? Tell me about that.
he likes to do this shit.
It dropped. Was that Little Boy? The name of the boat? It was Little Boy.
It was either Little Boy or Fat Man. I can't remember which the
I
first
think
one
it was
was.
Fat Man.
I think it was Fat Man.
Yeah.
They made them a little smaller for boxcar.
Neil, what do you think? What do you think?
Hey, we'll see.
I can tell you. You didn't ask what I think. You could ask me what I think. I watched
What do you think, Richard?
the 2 podcasts you sent, or you might have sent one and and I got the next one. But I watched 2 of them with that concrete company.
Yeah.
And I was pretty analytical about it. Both of the people interviewed were professional. Whether that was their business or not, I don't know. They might really have been criminals. But if you watched and if you analyzed their thought development, the sequence of thought development, their delivery, just look at the lighting. If you look at that, they have Rembrandt lighting on both of those interviews. They were not this same shit we're doing right here at all. Those podcasts were put together with a huge amount of thought, preparation, of editing. They are, both of them, pieces of art that look like.
I think it's hard. It's hard for me to get into the kind of flow that we ordinarily have just in casual conversation. I mean, where things are spontaneous and they just continue to, oh yeah, what about this? What about that? It's the first time we've done it, so
Maybe it's just
I have no idea what,
Yeah. I think
You
it's
need
great
to
though.
watch these guys.
yeah.
I mean, I've met a few real actors like Paul Newman and had conversations with him. He's got the cadence, he's got the articulation, he's got the facial reinforcement, the movements, the timing. Timing is everything. And some people are born with it, maybe both of these guys were born with it, and that's how they became con men. But they were absolute. I mean, it was so clean. It was clean of any garbage.
Richard's never seen a podcast until I sent him one.
Well, I was down the subject matter, but the performances, and that's really what it's all about. I mean, you read Henry David Thoreau. Now, who in the fuck wants to read Thoreau? But Thoreau can describe ants going up the windowsill of his cabin out there at Lake Walden. And the ants are moving, and he describes them, and you're there. You're captured by it. These guys could talk that way. It was so clean of garbage that when we talk, it's all over the place. It's full of garbage. These guys were not. There was lean, trim, and it was either exceptional ability, truly theatrical ability of the highest order, or those weren't real guys.
Well, I think that the one I sent him was Matt Cox's interview on Concrete.
That was the second one, yes. The first guy was a pilot and talked about flying things and was a little more caustic.
Both those guys spent more than 12 years in prison, so they've had plenty of time to tell their story.
And I thought about that too, that these guys were so practiced. That you and I, we were searching for something. Like right now, I'm searching for something. There was none of that. Or if there was, it was such a small amount that it reinforced the reality
Your
of
story
it.
on Greenland is well practiced. I mean, the thing about podcasts is that no one followed you guys around during this time with a video camera. Okay? The only thing that exists from these stories is your memory. And it's your memory. It's not my memory. It's not his memory. Your memory is your memory. How you guys take in other experiences in life and how you tell them is from your memory. So whatever story you have is going to be your story. If it's interesting, it's interesting. If it's not, it's not. But that's how you remember it.
The number of separate vignettes about Greenland is endless.
Of course.
It's absolutely endless. And, Richard, just did a quick synopsis there.
Yeah.
And, but,
Yeah, you told me
I
stories
mean, you could just about pick a day.
Oh, yeah. There was stories you told me about trying to find the flag after you guys came back. I think Doug
What now?
might have found the campsite after a year of it
Oh,
sitting.
the flagpole.
Oh, yeah.
Flagpole of the 89
Yeah.
expedition, which was, at the mess hall. And Gordon put us within a few feet of it. And when I poked my head out of the tent that
Oh,
morning,
there was no farther from here to that cart.
yeah, and when I poked my head out of the tent that morning, and there was a galvanized pipe, about 4 inches of galvanized pipe sticking out. This is after we had dug, I don't know, a lot of trenches, a number of parallel trenches, looking for the 89 campsite with no success.
We were on top of it.
Damn, Gordon,
It was under our tents.
that was the flagpole, within 10 or 12 feet
Wow.
of the entrance to the tent.
And the way he located it was with a surveyor's transit
Yeah,
pointing to an island, Witch's Tit, 15 miles away.
It's funny. You've also told me stories about all the locals when you guys first went up to Sandestrom were like, oh, yeah, they're just sitting out there on top of the ice. I saw them 5 years ago or something like that.
Yeah,
we
exactly.
had some pilots tell us that. There were 2 scientific expeditions on the ice cap when we were there, GISP and PICO, the Greenland Ice Sheet Project and the Polar Ice Coring Office. Those guys were in the officers' club at Sandestrom, which is also BW8, Bluey West 8, a very historic airfield. And they were explaining to us how we couldn't do it. They laughed. They thought it was the funniest damn thing they'd ever heard of. You're not going to be able to work down there. There's no oxygen. You can't work down there. I don't know if you remember there in the officers club. Those guys were, they were adamant. He said, well, and of course we didn't know any better. We didn't know we couldn't do it.
Right.
And
In fact, we took hose, 4-inch diameter flexible hose, and a fan so that we could blow air down the hole to have oxygen at the bottom of the hole.
and an oxygen meter, a $1,500 oxygen meter, which immediately was dropped into the
I was gone.
sump. Gone.
Someone dropped it from a top from.
No, from down
just
there.
Down there. You go down there, and it goes off, and there's just nothing but water under you. That you've melted your way down.
Yeah.
And so,
So-
it was a big puddle.
The first time down the hole, you spend 20, 25 minutes. By the end of the summer, we were spending 12 hours in the hole.
And
8 or 10.
You didn't need any.
There was no issue.
It comes off from the melting of the ice, the transition from ice to water, whatever it was. You don't need any supplemental oxygen. But we didn't know that. You don't know until you get there.
Right. It's a weird time too. There wasn't all this. You couldn't just Google something. And in many cases, you could probably Google something today, and it would be more proven because of what you guys did.
Oh my gosh, yes. As I said, we went to the Richard Byrd Institute. Those guys marveled at these good old boys from Georgia going down deeper than they've ever penetrated the ice cap and taking an airplane apart and pulling it up.
And none of you have any expedition understanding.
No, it's all from scratch.
You'd never done anything like that.
No, nobody else has either.
Yeah, I mean, but you weren't like a downpipe driller in the oil field. And Neil had never dug anything deeper than a footing.
I have a lot of chat dump experience.
So you guys
There's the proof.
So you came back, and then you decided that you were going to open up a British car shop.
What now?
You came back,
No, you had
opened up Neil's Restoration.
No, that was several years after I got back. Because we still did, well, that's it. We still did the Arts Festival for a couple more years, still had a couple of construction projects. So I kind of started working in 91 on cars.
so that's after 91 is when we got the plane out in 92.
92, yeah.
There's a lot of drama around this.
But
I
that
don't wanna
was-
get into, but
You know,
it's a different day.
yeah, that was, a well-orchestrated commercial event. I just called everybody up I knew and said, I'm working on cars now. I think Richard was either the first or one of the first customers. You're 9/11 or something like that.
Yeah, you worked on my 300 SL.
Well, yeah, that's true.
You did an electrical thing, which I still marvel at. I can't remember what it was, but it's some electrical complication.
Yeah, that car had a lot of interesting electrical circuits. I can't remember the occasion or why, but we used to be able to get the transmission out in like 35 minutes or something.
On the Mercedes?
Yeah, the transmission was a little tiny thing. I mean, I know we did it right there in your driveway one time. But I was always amazed at the size
Yeah.
of that transmission. I can't remember why.
Hey, well, this is time for an outro. So say thanks for watching.
Yeah,
Thank
that's what we're
Richard.
supposed to, you say that.
You do that.
Oh,
Eventually, you'll read the whole show.
Richard, thanks for watching.
Wait a minute. Buffalo Bill's defunct. He used to ride a water-smooth silver stallion and shoot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pigeons, just like that. Jesus, he was a handsome man. But how do you like your blue-eyed boy now, Mr. Death?
You're such a goof.
Okay, that's it for me.
Bye.